Hi guys, welcome back. First of all, just a quick announcement. I'm going to be in America for the next couple of weeks visiting with my folks, so you can expect updates on this channel to be a little patchy. Thank you though very much for your patience. I'll try to get back to a more regular update schedule as soon as I can. Now for today's video, as some of you probably noticed, I was at Salute in London last weekend, and that was really busy and really stressful. So, this week I just really felt like doing a model that would be easy, fun, relaxing, not too serious. And so I came up with this lady here, if you can see her. I actually got the model last year at Salute in 2015, and I've just been kind of hanging on to it, waiting for the right occasion. She is by Belt Fed Gaming, and they do a lot of these sort of pin-up style cheesecake type models, pretty tongue-in-cheek. This one's obviously supposed to look like kind of a skimpy 1940s style Aviator or something like that. And this model is actually probably one of their more PG rated figures, but it's just a lot of fun, a little bit silly, and I kind of like stuff like this, honestly. And also, I know that there are some people out there who kind of struggle with painting women, and especially getting their skin and kind of skin tone and stuff right, because it's a little bit different than male figures. And because this model is showing really quite a bit of skin, I thought that would be a really good opportunity, again, to go into painting, women's skin. And hopefully, I'll be able to give you a few tips that will help you out if you've got any similar models to deal with. Okay, to start off with, here are all the paints you're going to need to complete this model. It's not really all that much, and this does include the skin tone and all of that as well. So really simple in the paint department. I'm going to start out working on the skin here, and my base is going to be a mixture of cork brown and basic skin tone. I use that basically just to lighten the cork brown a little bit, because that's one of the first things you have to think about when you're doing women's skin. Generally, you want it to be a little bit paler and lighter than you would on a man. The other thing I'm doing here is I've got my paint thinner than I would probably usually do for such a base coat, and you can see I'm really focusing on putting on the smoothest, kind of most even layers I can do, even if the coverage is not good. And then I'm going to go back in a couple times and keep applying new layers till I build it up, because when you're doing this skin, getting everything really smooth and really even is extremely important for a good look. With a male figure, you can afford to be a little bit rougher and less precise, but with a woman, if you're at all sort of rough or kind of sloppy with how you apply your layers, it's really going to show later. Now I'm going to be applying a wash to the skin. This time I have taken a mix of Reichland Flesh Shade and a little bit of Cardboard Crimson, and I've then thinned that down so it's not at its full concentration, because I want the wash to be subtle. I don't want it to be too stark and too dark. And the red is in there because I just want a little bit more of a pinky kind of undertone than I would on a normal male model. My first highlight layer is now going to just involve taking more of that basic skin tone and mixing it into my base so that I've got a lighter color. You may notice that in my male figures, I tend to use Iraqi sand as my highlight color. The reason I switched to a basic flesh tone for this female figure is it's a sort of a more, pinky, sort of warmer color, I guess, a little less yellow tone. And I think that just looks a little bit better on girls, and so that's why I'm doing that. And I'm just sort of following the same advice I did when I applied my base layer. I'm keeping my paint really thin and applying really sort of smooth, even layer, and trying to build it up very slowly. What you want to do is not go for really high contrast like you would on the male model. You have to do it much more subtly and gradually, because if you get really sharp, deep shadows on a female figure, it's going to tend to make them not look as attractive. And I think probably that's what it comes down to with female figures. What you want is for them to look as attractive as you possibly can. Now, there still are a few dark areas you're going to want to paint, like around the eyes and nose and the lips and stuff. For that, I've taken my black red and I've lightened it slightly with the Cork brown because I don't want it to be quite as strong. You don't want the shadows under the eyes in particular to be as dark or with as much shadow as you would on a male figure. I'm now going to work on specifically highlighting the face, and I'm kind of doing it separate from the rest of the body because it's kind of tricky here and I really want to get it right before I move on to the rest. So I've got here a layer of just pure basic skin tone, and I'm using a number 0 brush now instead of my normal number 1 just to make sure I can get really good fine detail work. And I'm sort of highlighting the nose and the eyebrows and the eyelids and all those areas. You may want to paint eyeballs on your female figure. It's going to depend a lot on the model. With this one, I at first kind of went with painting eyeballs. I kind of lined the eyes with a dark brown and then tried to paint in the eyeballs, but I really was not happy with how that ended up looking. So I actually went back in a little bit later and sort of changed my mind. And here I am taking that basic skin tone and applying it to the rest of the body. Again, I've got it real thin, and I'm just really carefully building up on thin layers and just focusing on areas where I want there to be light hitting as always, but also at the same time really focusing on getting everything really smooth looking, getting these really nice soft blends wherever I can. And again, remember, female skin tends to look better when you let it get paler than male skin, so don't be afraid to let it get light either. Now I'm further refining the face. One thing I'm doing is the lips. On male figures, we usually just don't paint the lips because it would look silly if they had big, full, kind of pink lips. But when you're doing a female figure, exaggerating that aspect of the face will look fine. It's a little cartoonish, but it tends to look good in them. I took some Vallejo flat red here, and I used some ivory just to make it a lighter pink shade. You can even work in some of the basic skin tone if you want, and I'm using that to carefully paint in especially her bottom lip. You want her bottom lip to be a bit lighter, and her upper lip should kind of be a darker red or pink shade, and then you can put some little sort of lighter pink highlights along the bottom lip to indicate a bit of shininess there. Now I'm back to highlighting her face again. I've taken some ivory from Vallejo and mixed it into the basic skin tone now to get a paler peach color, and I'm using that to apply more highlights to her nose and cheeks and forehead, and again still using my small number 0 brush for really good control. In the meantime, I've also been messing with her eyes a bit more, and I ended up using sort of a pinky, sort of mixing some red with my Cork brown to get sort of a pinky brownish color, and use that to sort of apply the sort of softer highlights in and around her eyes, and just paint them in a way so they look a little bit like they're closed, so they're not exactly open. I just think that gives it a more beautiful, kind of delicate look in the end of the figure. I'm now continuing to highlight the rest of the body like I did the face with my sort of mixture of basic skin tone with a little bit of ivory in there, and I'm just gonna again be highlighting the legs and arms and the belly and all of that, building up several thin layers just to get a nice effect. You can see when you've got sort of assuming kind of really smooth sort of looking flesh like you'd expect on a woman's legs, you may want to consider building up sort of a highlight just on the side to give a little sense of a little bit of shininess there. That just tends to look really good, so you may want to just have a stripe that's a little lighter there than normal. And because it's really important just to have as many different subtle layers as you can, I added even more ivory now into that coat that I had last time, and I'm just going back over again to apply yet another sort of really subtle highlight layer, really now focusing on areas where light's hitting, like the knees and the fronts of the thighs and the belly, the tops of the arms, and of course on the face, again going back over and really using that number 0 brush in those places just to make sure that there's sufficient control. I would recommend that you stick with the number 1 though for the rest of the body, just because you have some big areas there where you need to kind of blend, and if you try to use a really tiny brush, you're going to actually find it's harder than if you've got a slightly bigger point that just lets you sort of smooth that a lot more quickly and easily. I ended up finishing off the skin using just pure ivory here, and I'm really only applying it sparingly to areas where there really should be a lot of light, just sort of like on the knees, and to emphasize any sort of musculature, like at the backs of the knees as well, and around the belly button, the hips, the elbows, and especially, of course, on the face. You're really going to, again, want to really put extra highlight on the tops of those cheekbones, along the brows, along the center of the nose, the chin, all those kind of places. Just can always pretty much use just an extra little bit of oomph. And remember, it doesn't take very much at all to get the effect that you want. Now I'm going to work on her uniform, or what there is of it. I'm going with a sort of classic Aviator palette, which is kind of indicated by what she's wearing. So kind of sort of this brown leather with Shearling fleece trim everywhere. If you're looking for more on this whole process, I do have a video I did on the Red Baron, and he's wearing sort of a similar type of clothing, albeit much, much more than she is. So if you want alternative ideas for painting this kind of stuff, be sure to check that out. But anyway, at this point, I'm really just base coating all of the leather areas using German camouflage black brown. My first highlight on the leather areas is going to be real subtle. I'm going back in here with Vallejo chocolate brown, and I'm just starting to pick out any sort of higher areas. With this kind of fly gear leather, you do want to really leave that dark brown there. You want some transparency, so you don't want to spend too much time trying to cover it up, and you definitely want to leave that dark down in cracks more than maybe you would on other colors, because you know, with this sort of stuff, you get a lot more sort of modeling, and depending on how the leather wears, you'll get areas that are quite a bit lighter and then some areas that are quite a bit darker, even though it has nothing to do with light hitting, if that makes any sense. So, but this brown shade, you can apply this pretty much everywhere, at least in some degree, and you know, it's just a good way to start just building up that contrast. I've now mixed a bit of Cork brown into my chocolate brown, and I'm going to start kind of carefully highlighting a little bit more than I had before. So you can see on the boots, I'm really picking out all the folds and creases and the sort of the separate parts there. And on areas like the fingers and hands, it's pretty easy too, because you're really just going to want to pick out, you know, the separate fingers. And of course, again, because this is a female figure, and a sort of a pin-up female figure, I should clarify, you tend to want to sort of use colors a little bit, I don't know, to accentuate her assets, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to be thinking about like her butt, for example, and her boobs. I'm going to be thinking about using the lighter colors to sort of highlight those areas and make them stand out even more. So you can see how I'm applying the sort of the lighter colors towards the centers of her, you know, breasts and her butt, and sort of just building them out and adding emphasis that way. And you can actually, you're going to want to do the same thing too on the top of the head, because that's another sort of big round surface. Think about applying lighter browns up there and just building up the lighter color in that area as well. I'm now moving on and continuing to do just what I did before, but now using only a pure Cork brown. And just, again, building up, really see how I'm really starting to pick out all the folds and creases and stuff, so that you really see a real pop here. You have to be a little bit careful when you're painting these sort of dark leather or flying gear, again, not to get rid of too much of the dark tone, just like I said at the beginning. So, you know, make sure you leave that in places, and when you do apply the lighter colors, do it kind of sparingly and thinly, and you know, you really need to maintain transparency of sort of the other colors so they really shine through, because that's how you're going to get a nice effect. I should also mention, when you're doing this gear, you don't necessarily need to worry about getting the most smooth blend possible, because when this sort of leather stuff wears, it tends to get a little rough and scratchy. So you can use a little bit of stippling or a little bit of sort of feathering, where you're just putting sort of fine lines down, but not trying to get them completely smooth. And that'll look good, because it'll just look like the leather. It'll just kind of add texture to the leather, make it look a little scratched or whatever. And it just overall produces a nice effect, which is an advantage, I guess, to painting this kind of gear that you don't have to be quite so concerned with getting a super smooth blend. Now my final highlight is going to be the Cork brown, but now with a little bit of the basic skin tone mixed into it, and I'm really using this very, very sparingly. Be really careful. You don't want this to really, it can really easily overwhelm, I guess, the darker brown areas, so you really only want this in very thin lines where you really have sharp folds, or really want to define the edges between different areas and things like that. So, you know, just put this on very, very, very carefully, but you should still do it because it will really kind of add a nice finishing touch to how the overall model looks, just to pick out these things. You can see I'm also lining any sort of seams in the fabric with this really light color. And of course, you can also put in areas of extreme wear a little bit, again sparingly, like the toes of the boots, or maybe extra a little bit on the top of the hat, just because that area is going to have a lot of light hitting it. So it's okay if it gets maybe a little bit brighter than some of the other areas. I'm now going to base coat the Shearling trim. The color I used for this is a mixture of the Cork brown, but I've lightened it an awful lot with ivory, so it's kind of this very light tan color, as you can see. And I'm just gonna carefully apply a base coat here. I did find I needed a couple layers just because it's a light color and the coverage is not great over the black, so just make sure you go back and really get a good coverage, because this is not a place where you want really dark areas kind of shining through. To highlight that shearling, I'm now going back in with pure ivory. Again, fairly thin down, but you can see I'm just kind of applying it sort of with a fairly light brush, a light hand, I should say, over top of my base. I'm tending to focus it towards the tops of those areas, so you know, just make sure you get you should have a little bit of a lighter look towards the tops of the trim, and then the underneath side of the trim should be a little bit darker. You should leave it more in the base. And again, by keeping the paint thin here, I'm going to be able to build it up a little bit more. In some areas, get a little bit lighter, and that way I can just get more different tones and a lot more variation using only one shade as a highlight. I ended up deciding to get even more contrast just by going back in with a little bit of pure white on the shearling. Again, it's thin, it's transparent, and you don't want to put too many coats on so that you lose all of that sort of creamy brown underneath and that warmth that you want to see in shearling fleece. But this was really helpful, I found, for getting just some extra bright highlights, like on the places where I thought a lot of light would be hitting the trim. Now I'm going to work on an aviator scarf. You could be real classic here, and I consider just going for the plain sort of white silk scarf that you see a lot of people or classic aviators wearing. But in the end, I really, really thought this figure could use a pop of color because it's otherwise so neutral and brown. So I'm going to make the scarf red in this case. I've grabbed some black red now, and I'm just going to use that to very carefully base coat the scarf. My first highlight on the scarf was then a mixture of that flat red that I already had out for like painting her lips and some of her complexion, with a good dose of the black red in there to darken it down. And I'm just going to be carefully using that to pick out all the sort of careful little fringes at the end of the scarf, and then just any clear wrinkles or folds. And this is just like what I would do if I was using Citadel red, which I often do. It's the same deal. I'm just going to be applying multiple layers and really building it up, because red is a color that just really benefits from being built up gradually. And now I've just got pure flat red, and I'm going to be using that to carefully pick out more than I had before the sort of the tops of any creases or folds in the fabric, and the fringes at the ends and anything like that. Again, just building it up over several layers just to make sure that I can get it as bright and saturated as possible. I added some extra highlights to the scarf then by mixing a bit of my basic flesh tone into the flat red to lighten it, and I'm just going to use that to more carefully define the creases, and particularly that fringe, because I found this sort of lighter pink color is a really good way, used sparingly, to add some extra definition to red things like this. Now I'm going to move on to the sort of black and gray areas of the model. I'm starting out with just black here, as you might expect, to get another good solid base coat. I'm painting the soles of her shoes black, and I'm also going to be painting her goggles and sort of the side bits on her aviator hat in black. And then I'm going to just start working on highlighting all of those areas carefully. And I'm going to be using just some ivory paint. I'm just going to be gradually mixing it into my black and then using that to create sort of progressive shades to highlight all of those areas. I ended up keeping these sort of different layers I made really thin and subtle, so you can see the first one is very, very dark gray, and just really carefully and slowly building it up because I find that tends to work best on these black gray areas. I didn't end up highlighting the boots quite as far as I did the goggles because I figured that would be kind of a little bit of a shiny rubber look, so I thought it would be good to put some slightly higher gray highlights on it than I did on the soles of the shoes, but that can really be up to your discretion. It does really look nice to leave a few little very thin shiny bits where some light is hitting, because you'd expect, I don't know, you just expect all of her clothes to look nice and new and shiny and have like a lot of sort of sparkle and gleam to them, I guess. It's definitely not like painting a male figure where you might expect the whole thing to be a little bit more toned down and a little bit grimier. You might have wondered what I was going to do with that medium blue that I showed at the very start of the video. Well, I'm using it to paint the glass in her goggles. I first base coated the goggles by mixing the medium blue into some black for a very, very dark base. Then I took pure medium blue and I'm going for a gradient from sort of lighter to darker at the bottom. And so the medium blue you paint then sort of halfway down the goggles. And then I mix some ivory into the medium blue to make a real pale shade. And I'm using that to just put a little light, thin sort of line where there's a lot of light reflecting, just kind of along the very top edge of the glass. Now the final thing I want to paint is there's a little bit of sort of brass hardware, particularly on her boots, but she's also got a brass belt buckle on her pants. So I took some German camouflage black brown, just added a little bit of gold to it, Vallejo Air Gold that is, and applied a base coat to those areas. Then I'm going to go back in with just pure Vallejo Air Gold to just really quickly highlight them. You don't need to go any brighter than that because this should be kind of a more bronzy color, not too over the top, but it just is nice to get these little sort of shiny detail areas done. Okay, so here is the finished sort of World War II pinup flygirl type model. I liked how this came out. I should say that I put a lot more time maybe than I showed in film into just kind of refining and perfecting certain areas of the model, particularly the skin and face. On a model like this, it's really important that the face is attractive and smooth and really beautiful looking. You can't just go like you do with a male figure and just paint it however, and if it ends up looking a little craggy or characterful, that's fine, it doesn't matter. If you do that on a woman, especially a female figure like this that is supposed to be obviously a beauty model, it will really look bad. So you really have to make sure whatever else you do that you get the face looking really nice. And also just that the skin, as I told you before, is really smooth, has a really even blend, and really is quite subtle, because that is what looks good on a figure like that. But even though this did take me some time to work out what I was doing, in the end I was really happy with the results. I had fun with it. I always like painting this sort of shearling and brown leather combo. It's once you work out the combination of paints that you need and how to do it, it actually goes really easily, and it usually produces really nice results. So as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like it, please share it, leave me comments with what you thought. Maybe you want to see more female figures in the future. I'm certainly happy to paint them if you like that. And do, of course, subscribe to my channel if you haven't gotten a chance to do so already. So that's all for now, and I will see you next time.